Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be diving back into everyone's favorite cybernetically enhanced mutant superhero team with Cyberforce number 1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in November of 1993, some of you watching this video may be thinking to yourselves, wait a second, Bo, you've already made a video about Cyberforce number 1, and you're correct. However, that Cyberforce number 1 was of the mini-series that preceded the ongoing series. We can see here up in the Image Comics logo, it even says, now an ongoing series. So for some reason, Marc Silvestri decided to make a mini-series starting at number 1. Then after the mini-series finishes, he makes a Cyberforce number 0 that bridges the gap between the mini-series and the ongoing series, and then starts the numbering back at number 1 for the ongoing series. Now, if that sounds confusing to you, it's because it is. Plot, pencils, Marc Silvestri. Plot, script, Eric Silvestri. Inks, Scott Williams. Letters, Mike Heisler. Colors, Joe Chiodo. Editor, David Wall. Color separations, Ollie Optics. Film output, Tony Kelly and Kello Graphics. The story begins with Ripclaw alone in a sewer, clearly wounded, bleeding, struggling to maintain consciousness, trying to escape a foe that he cannot fight off, and he notices that he's experiencing the worst emotion of all, which is fear, something that Ripclaw doesn't deal with well. However, before he can get his bearings and force his body to keep going, he is once again assaulted by the antagonist that is chasing him through the sewers, who is shadowy and mysterious, and I'm lying. This is clearly Warblade. I mean, I don't even know why they would try to, disguise the fact that this is Warblade. There's no question in anyone's mind that this is just Warblade. Regardless of that, Warblade immediately gets the upper hand, slashes Ripclaw across the chest, and then tells him that he knows where Ripclaw is going to die and that he's going to show him. We then see Ripclaw shoot up screaming no with a very detailed close-up of his face. Seriously, shout out to Scott Williams and Joe Chiodo for this issue. The inks and colors in this book are phenomenal. I have no complaints about them whatsoever. We then realize that the entire interaction that happened on the previous page was just a dream that Ripclaw had. More of a nightmare, honestly. As he puts his hand on his head and says, "Get out of my head, get out of my head," we realize that this is something that Ripclaw has a hard time dealing with, this emotion of fear and dread. And it's something that he is not really good at handling. It's very much wearing on him to have these sorts of feelings, and it's not something that he's very used to. We then are teleported to a wooded area outside of Westchester, New York, where we see Velocity running through the forest. She thinks to herself about the events that have happened over the past few weeks and months, which led to this moment, how she was captured by Cyberdata, the mind wipe that they gave her, stealing her memories away, and the gratitude that she feels to Cyberforce for saving her from the clutches of Cyberdata, believing that if they had not done this, she would have certainly been turned into some kind of killer zombie mutant that only lived to serve the will of Cyberdata, and that she's very grateful for the fact that she now has her own life back and can choose where she goes from here. And at this point, she's chosen to try and join the Cyberforce team. However, they're not going to just let her join despite her abilities. They want her to pass an application process, which is what she's currently in the middle of. Unfortunately, during all of this thought process, she kind of wasn't really paying attention to what was going on around her, and she's suddenly caught off guard by something that she wasn't expecting to run into. Velocity then skids to a halt as she is suddenly confronted by a large spider-ish mech, which tries to stomp on her. However, she's very much easily able to dodge out of the way, only to be confronted by another mech that is behind her. She immediately flips over the top of it, thinking to herself that while it is scary looking, it's very slow, which works to her advantage. As she lands on the opposite side of the mech, she wonders what else might be out here to confront her when she looks up and sees a familiar face. Also, this is something that kind of bothers me a little bit about the Cyberforce narrative. Where exactly is the funding coming from to create these types of large scale mech robots and, maintain the upkeep of their base and the upkeep of their bodies? I understand they have some super geniuses working for them in terms of being able to handle this maintenance load, but exactly where is the money coming from to pay for all of it? That part has yet to be explained. We then see that the familiar face in question belongs to none other than Ripclaw. Not understanding what's going on, Velocity is initially quite happy to see him, stating, "See, Ripclaw, you said I was too young, but I told you I could do it." However, Ripclaw is not amused as he tells her that these droids posed no actual threat to her, and that if she's ever going to prove that she's ready to be on Cyberforce, she needs to face an adversary of actual flesh and bone, one that can actually keep up with her and cause her to realize her own mortality. Not truly understanding what he's saying, Velocity's like, "Well, that's cool, but I better get going." However, at this point, Ripclaw seems to get angry as he states, "This is just a game to you, isn't it?" Not understanding the situation still, Velocity asks what he means, and he explains to her that she cannot just keep running away from everything, that she needs to understand the true hazards of combat if she's going to pass her training. Velocity tries to figure out exactly what he's getting at, but she's interrupted when Ripclaw states, "Why don't we try playing a different game? It's called Deer Meat. You play the fawn, and I play the big hungry bear. I'm going to chase you through the woods, and if you can make it back to Subplex before I catch you, you get to live. If not, you're deer meat." He then takes a swipe at her, which she quickly ducks under, and he ends up slicing a tree trunk in half next to her. He then squints his eyes and says, "Run, little deer, run." Realizing that he means business, Velocity genuinely becomes fearful of Ripclaw as she starts to run, thinking, "I've seen that look in his eyes before, and I know this is real. I have to get out of here," as she immediately tries to make a break for Subplex, fearing that her life is in true danger. Meanwhile, back at Subplex underneath Gabby's garage, we see that the rest of the Cyberforce team is monitoring this situation and they don't like what they see. Cyblade has called Heatwave in to explain to him that the training mission is starting to go awry, that Velocity was initially just supposed to be doing basic evasive maneuvers against robotic drones, but now everything is kind of going haywire. Chip interjects and explains that she's now 60 degrees off course, and Cyblade goes on to explain that everything was going fine until Ripclaw showed up, and while she couldn't hear exactly what he said to Velocity, that's when everything changed and Velocity started running like her life depended on it. Chip exclaims that she's gotten all the way up to 90 miles an hour, and Cyblade is worried because she thinks that this is far too fast for the terrain that Velocity doesn't really know all that well. She then thinks to herself that Velocity has had a very tough life up until this point, and she's actually quite worried that Ripclaw is pushing her around and deliberately trying to hurt her chances at joining the Cyberforce team. She then thinks to herself that if Ripclaw does in fact succeed in harming Velocity's chances, that he's going to have to answer to her. Back in the forest, we see that Velocity is running like mad, going faster and faster until she realizes that she is indeed moving too fast and that she's lost her way. She then begins to slow down and notices some landmarks that seem familiar and comes to a stop. Unfortunately, these landmarks seem familiar because this is exactly where she just encountered Ripclaw. She's actually gotten herself turned all the way around to the point she's back where she started. Ripclaw jumps out and lunges at her, stating, "You've actually exceeded my expectations. I expected you to get lost, but not so quickly. And I almost feel bad for taking advantage of one who has such terrible survival skills. But as I stated, this game has to have a winner and a loser," as he tackles her to the ground. Also, I'd like to point out that this is a point where we notice that despite Velocity being a mutant who has super speed abilities, her speed abilities are nowhere close to that of the Flash or Quicksilver. Obviously, it does seem like she is quite a female analog of Quicksilver in this instance, a mutant with super speed. However, while she does have superhuman speed, At this point, it's only being portrayed as her being able to run like, 90, 100 miles an hour, whereas characters like Quicksilver and the Flash can both exceed the speed of light. So it's kind of on a completely different level for her versus them, and she's nowhere close to their capabilities, at least the way she's portrayed at this point in the story. At this point, Ripclaw looks up and uses one of his hands to pin Velocity firmly to the ground, putting one of his claws directly in her face. He then tells her that she should have been warned how easy it is to get lost in these woods, and then tells her to pay attention, that the two of them are flesh and blood, tooth and claw, and that this is all really happening, that he isn't some robot or hologram. He then goes on to try and make another point. However, he is interrupted when he's hit from behind by a blast from none other than Heatwave. Heatwave has seen enough at this point and tells Ripclaw that he needs to back off, that he doesn't know what's going on, but it ends here. Ripclaw, however, then responds by stating that he was only trying to show Velocity exactly what they were going to be doing and what she was getting herself into. Ripclaw, in his own way, was actually trying to protect Velocity, as he believed that this isn't really a life that she should be leading, and that she still has a chance to go on to have a normal existence that doesn't involve facing down danger at every turn. He then tells Heatwave, look, we're killers. And Heatwave says, yes, but we also save lives. However, Ripclaw responds by stating, yeah, but what kind of life is this? We're all just ticking time bombs. Don't you hear it? The constant clicking, all it does is get louder. At this point, Heatwave starts to get a little worried about the psychological health of Ripclaw and states, hey, Ripclaw, maybe we should just talk for a minute. However, he's interrupted when Ripclaw states, no, just leave me alone. All of you leave me alone. We're then teleported to a bar in Queens, New York, where we see a woman sitting by herself having a drink. She is approached by a man who puts his arm around her and says, oh, I like the way that jacket looks on you. Is that real leather? I can tell. Feels great. However, he is suddenly surprised when the woman grabs him by the tie and says, oh, that's a nice tie. It looks good on you. She then slams his face into the bar and states, oh, is that real oak? I can tell. The man gets up and is dazed as he stumbles out of the bar and thinks to himself, she's upset right now. I should probably come back later after I get a new tie and some flowers. Yeah, that'll do the trick. I think I'm in love, which is kind of hilarious that this is his reaction to just having his face smashed into the bar. And we then see that a shadowy figure has just entered the bar in question as the woman continues her drink. The new patron approaches the woman at the bar from behind and says, mind if I? However, she cuts him off immediately and says, can't you creeps take a hint? As she spins around, we then realize that this is in fact Ballistic. She rears back with her cybernetic hand and throws a punch, which is then caught by a second cybernetic hand. This one, of course, belonging to none other than Stryker. Stryker then greets her stating, Ballistic, right? I thought you looked familiar. And Ballistic is quite shocked as she says, Stryker, what do you want? Why are you here? Stryker tells her that he's here to help, but Ballistic says, I don't need anyone's help. I can take care of myself. And Stryker responds by stating, yeah, I'm not here to take care of you. I'm here to bring you back to the subplex so that we can all have a nice long conversation. However, Ballistic responds stating that she has no interest in talking to him. However, at this point, Stryker starts to get a little bit more frustrated and states, look, it's not about talking to you. It's about your younger sister, Karen, that you didn't know existed up until recently. You're the only family she's got, and she needs your help. Ballistic, however, doesn't want to hear any of this as she states, yeah, well, Karen's a big girl and she can take care of herself. Stryker says that he still plans on trying to bring Ballistic in, but Ballistic states that she's not going anywhere with him and that she's not interested in listening to him or anyone else that wants to tell her how to live her life, as she then smashes him across the face with a bottle that she picked up off of the bar. She then tells Stryker that he can go straight to hell and never come back. I also find it funny that despite having gotten into a physical altercation with two separate patrons now, nobody else in the bar seems to even remotely think that this is odd behavior and are just like, oh yeah, it's totally normal that a woman comes in here and just starts beating the crap out of every man that tries to talk to her. That's not anything to be worried about at all. Understandably, Stryker is not too happy about having a bottle smashed across his face, so he grabs Ballistic and throws her over the bar into the mirror behind the bar. He then says, "Look, we saved you from cyber data and took that brain box out of your head. I know it's difficult putting all these pieces back together, but you do it because there's other people out there who are counting on you. Now you're coming back with me the easy way or the hard way." However, Ballistic remains defiant as she gets her bearings and states, "How many times do I have to tell you? You don't tell me what to do, nobody tells me what to do, and you sure as hell don't come in here and start pushing me around," as she lunges back over the bar and tackles Stryker through a table. Meanwhile, back at Subplex, we see that Velocity is inside of some sort of healing tube that is addressing the, not necessarily wounds, but slight injuries that she suffered at the hands of Ripclaw during her training exercise. As she thinks to herself, I really do feel better, guys. Like, you can let me out of this tube at any time. And, Ripclaw was probably just playing a joke, right? Like, that's pretty funny. Deer meat, haha. But then she thinks to herself, ouch, as she winces after laughing. We then see that Dr. Corbin is engaged in conversation with Impact, and he asks him, you know Ripclaw better than anyone. What do you think? However, Impact responds by stating that no one really knows Ripclaw and that he really does kind of keep to himself. He mentions that Stryker noticed him earlier this morning and said that he looked uneasy, like he wasn't sleeping very well. At this point, Dr. Corbin asks Timmy how Velocity's doing. He gives her an update on her status, talking about how most of her wounds seem to be healing up okay, but that one of her eyes seems to have suffered a little bit of visual impairment that he's addressing at this moment. Going back to his conversation with Impact, Dr. Corbin tells him that he wants to speak to Ripclaw ASAP. However, he then thinks that maybe Stryker should be involved in this conversation as well, and he asks Impact exactly where Stryker's at. Impact tells him that Stryker left earlier to go to a bar in Queens and hunt down Ballistic. Going back to the bar in Queens, we see a bar stool getting thrown through the window of the bar and two patrons running out. One of them stating, "Man, just our luck, the first good-looking woman that comes into this bar that I've ever seen, and she turns out to be some kind of Terminator." The other man says, "Yeah, I know, right? What's this world coming to?" Which is kind of funny and poignant to 1993, bringing up the Terminator. I would also like to point out that this is another key difference between someone like Velocity and the likes of the Flash or Quicksilver. She's also not, able to do any kind of super healing that the two of them would possess. So not only is she marginally slower, not even marginally, very distinctly slower than the two of those characters, she doesn't even have all of their same abilities, setting her apart from the two of them. Again, I know she has super speed, and that is kind of like a pretty default superhero power, but she's definitely done quite a bit differently than the likes of the Flash or Quicksilver, making her feel a bit more unique and in many ways more vulnerable than the two of them are, given how much less powerful she seems to be than those two. As the battle inside of the bar continues, we see Ballistic evade one of Stryker's attacks and yell at him, "No one ever lays a hand on me, and if you touch me again, I'll kill you." At this point, Stryker responds by stating, "Look, Ballistic, I know about your old man. Karen told us everything." This only enrages Ballistic more as she states, "I don't appreciate people knowing more about myself than I do, especially when they bring up that stupid effing piece of crap, who was always trying to beat up on my little sister." She then grabs a handful of straws, throwing them at Stryker, stating, "You stay away from her, you son of a bitch." Stryker shields himself with a piece of broken table as we see the straws lodge into the table and the wall like knives, and he states, "I'm sorry I even brought it up." Ballistic once again lunges forward, preparing to attack once more, stating, "No, you're not sorry now, but you will be." However, Stryker knocks her away, stating, "Damn it, Ballistic, I'm not your father." And this is the point where we see that Ballistic is really struggling with the after effects of the brain box that was inserted into her mind by cyber data, that her memories are jumbled and that sometimes she can't always control them, and she loses track of what's a memory and what's really happening around her, as she even confused Stryker for her own father at a moment, or for a moment. And We also learn of the abuse that she and Velocity suffered at the hands of their father, and we realize that there's a lot of trauma in her past that she still needs to deal with. Stryker then lunges on top of Ballistic and pins her to the ground, stating, "Listen, I've been holding back because I believe that there's still a decent person inside there. On top of that, you can call me old-fashioned, but I have a lot of reservations about putting my hand on a member of the opposite sex." This makes Ballistic smile as she says, "Well, there's only one thing left to say to you, Stryker. Welcome to the 90s," as she kicks him square in the balls and states, "Oh, it's good to find out not every part of you is made of metal." Stryker crumples and struggles to get his bearings back. As we see Ballistic exiting the bar, she turns back and tells him, "Look, Stryker, I'm sorry that you had to get wrapped up in all of this. I know deep down you are just trying to help, but trust me, you can't help me with this. Nobody can," as Stryker just says, "Aw, nuts." We then get an advertisement for the first annual Wizard year-end blowout. I do not have this issue of Wizard, and I don't know that I ever thumbed through it, but if you ever read this issue of Wizard at the end of their apparent first year, I believe, or maybe it was just the first time they did this blowout, I'm not certain. Let me know what it was about. I really don't have any recollection of it, so I'd be interested in hearing what you thought about it in the comments below. We are then teleported to the New York City skyline, where we see Ripclaw standing perched up atop a building, patrolling the streets. However, in his intent gaze upon the streets below, he doesn't notice the attack coming at him from above and behind when two shadowy figures crash into him, knocking him off of his perch and through the rooftop of another nearby building. They land inside of the bedroom of an NYC apartment, terrorizing the people who live in the apartment, of course, who are shocked and scared of what's going on, understandably so. And we then see the same shadowy figure, who is obviously Warblade, begin to attack him once again. Warblade then asks him, "Do you remember what I talked to you about earlier, that place? The place where you die? Well, this is it," as we see him throw Ripclaw out through the window of the apartment. He then lands on top of Ripclaw on another nearby rooftop as Ripclaw thinks to himself, "I must call on the spirit of the bear to save me from this." And then he is interrupted by a voice that sounds familiar to him as it states, "Oh, I don't have the heart to tell him." But another voice says, "Oh, I do. See, the problem is here, Bobby, that spirit of the bear isn't coming to help you. No one is." As Ripclaw looks up and states, "Oh my God, this can't be." Keep in mind, for anyone who has potentially forgotten, Ripclaw's real name is Robert Bearclaw, so calling him Bobby is kind of like, "Hey, we know who you are" type of thing, showing a familiarity between these characters and Ripclaw that we have not seen that comes from the past. We then finally see the two figures not in shadow, but in full color, and discover that, of course, it's Warblade. It was always Warblade. There was no possibility that it wasn't Warblade, but also Misery. The two of them look down at Ripclaw, who is trying desperately to get to his feet, and mock him, stating, "Just like old times, huh? Except this time it's going to be a lot different." We then see Warblade look down upon him and state, "This time it's your turn to die," as he extends one of his bladed fingers and plunges it into Ripclaw. Ripclaw then awakens once again from what is obviously another nightmare and screams out, "No, it can't be. They're still alive. Warblade and Misery. That's impossible." His screaming, however, wakes up the rest of the Cyberforce team, who all jump out of bed and immediately make way towards Ripclaw's bedroom. They open the door to find out that he is nowhere to be seen, and Heatwave immediately asks the computer to find out what his location is. The computer responds by stating that he's no longer in the facility and that he's heading in a northwest direction. This is something that Heatwave was worried about earlier when he heard the way that Ripclaw was talking when he intervened and stopped him from the quote-unquote lesson he was trying to teach Velocity. As he says, "We've got to go find him." At this point, Cyblade says, "I kept hearing him state the word misery. Do you really think that's what we believe it might be?" And Heatwave says, "I'm not certain, but if it is, we're in real trouble," as we reach the end of the story and see that this is to be continued. We then get back-to-back advertisements for the Killer Instinct storyline. The first ad actually gives a really good breakdown of the comics you need to read and in which order to get this storyline. It begins with Wildcats number 5, then Cyberforce number 1, Wildcats number 6, Cyberforce number 2, Wildcats number 7, and then Cyberforce number 3. Now, I've already made a video on Wildcats number 5, and if you'd like to check it out to get the beginning of this storyline, you can find that video in my Wildcats playlist, because I absolutely planned this out to do it in this exact order. And it totally wasn't an accident that I just happily stumbled into by pure happenstance. That's right, folks. Planning. That's it. That's what I did. We then get an advertisement for the Wildcats number 6 issue, which is the next portion of this story, which I'll be making a video on in the future at some point, so stay tuned for that. We then get into Scribble Force, the reader-submitted letter section where you could potentially get your letters responded to by members of the Homage Studios. We also see a few pieces of reader-submitted artwork with Impact here and Ripclaw, which would have been a lot cooler if they hadn't covered most of the drawing with the letters themselves, especially the Ripclaw one. I mean, literally, this is something like 70% of this drawing being covered. This is crazy. And at that point, you're almost wondering why they even bothered to print the artwork in the pages of the book in the first place. Now, most of these letters are nothing that special, though there were a couple that I found interesting, one of which asked what the 2 initials of Timmy's cat stood for. The cat is always referred to as CC in the pages of the comic. And as it turns out, that's because the cat's name is Cybercat, which I guess is fitting, but not necessarily all that creative, so I guess CC is what they went with. On the final page of the letter section, we get a drawing of Velocity holding CC, and they also bring up the Cyberforce trading cards, which were going to be coming out in the near future at this time. Now, I have a complete set of the Cyberforce trading cards, and while it is cool that they exist, I don't really care for them all that much, mostly because they made the decision to make every single card in the entire series chromium. Not just a couple, the whole series. And while this sounds like it might be a cool idea on paper, the unfortunate part is that chromium, as we've seen in the past, in my opinion, generally detracts from a lot of the detail of the artwork that it's involved in. So when you then take chromium and use it to overlay over top of artwork that's all on a trading card, you're just completely eliminating almost any and all detail that existed on there. Like, they really suffer from having the chromium motif on every one of these cards, in my opinion. I get what they were going with, sticking with the whole cybernetic aspect and, you know, trying to set themselves aside from the rest of the trading card pack that existed in the early 90s. They were everywhere, so the idea that you would have a full set of chromium cards was unique, but it just kind of missed the mark, in my opinion. We then get, of course, to Image Info, which was just a breakdown of upcoming events and comic books of Image in 1993, so I'm not going to bore anyone trying to read through all of that. The next page is actually a response from Marc Silvestri, as apparently they got a lot of blowback for only releasing Codename Strikeforce number 1 in a full foil cover, which of course upped the price of the book. And apparently a lot of readers were really upset about that and let Marc Silvestri know. So at this point, they've decided that they're going to announce the release of a standard cover for Codename Strikeforce with only a $1.95 price point on it. Now, you can see that standard cover and the gold foil cover in my video on Codename Strikeforce number 1. You can find that in my Codename Strikeforce playlist if you're interested in watching it. And you can also learn more about the adventures of Stryker, Blood Bow, Tempest, Black Anvil, and of course, Marc Silvestri's greatest creation of his entire career, Killraiser. We then get an advertisement for Bow and Board, which was a mail-away service where you could order issues of books you didn't have, signed books, and also original artwork from different artists that you enjoyed. I don't know if Bow and Board still exists. I really should look it up at some point to see if this company's still around. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Art of Homage Studios. I really hope one day that I can get my hands on one of these. I don't currently own one as I'm recording this video, but I would love to be able to thumb through one of these and see the different, unique artworks that were published in it. And I also like the idea that there's this whole, sizzling new swimsuit pinups, but more importantly, the How to Draw Comics the Homage Way section, which of course is a play on the How to Draw the Marvel Way series of books that Marvel Comics put out back in was it the 80s or the 90s? Man, I really can't remember. If you remember exactly when those books were published, feel free to put it in the comments below, because I, for the life of me, can't remember at this moment, and I don't feel like looking it up. And that was Cyberforce #1 from the ongoing series. And I gotta say, I like this book quite a bit. I feel like this book is a massive improvement over what we saw in the Cyberforce miniseries. The artwork in the miniseries was great. It's just as good as what we see here, but I feel like where this book excels is with the writing and the storytelling. A lot of the story in the miniseries felt kind of convoluted and rushed at points, whereas you can tell that it's really gained a lot since then, that Eric Silvestri has managed to really up his game a bit, and especially this being, the second part of the Killer Instinct crossover event that was happening between Cyberforce and Wildcats. It really just flows into it perfectly. It's amazing how much of a difference a few months can make in terms of one person's ability to just kind of really up their game and take a look at what they were doing wrong and change that to make a much better product going forward. But then again, these are all just my opinions. You might have thought that the story from the miniseries was a-okay and that there was nothing wrong with it at all. And you might think that the whole introduction into the Killer Instinct crossover event isn't really that good so far. But if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.